All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you to Seven Signal for having me back again. Um, I'll try to keep my own rants to a minimum, but some of them will, absolutely come out in the presentation and kind of just who I am. But it's also a topic that might be a little polarizing in spots. So I look forward to questions at the end and comments. So again, Wi-Fi mistakes we all have to make on occasion. On occasion, that word mistake, um, obviously, that's going to be kind of fluid. Sometimes it's like you just have to do things a little bit different, and it is what it is. But at the same time, it's interesting people's take on that, which I'll get into. Just a little bit about me. I am newly a Hoosier. For those who are following my every move, I've relocated from upstate New York to Indiana, and so far enjoying it. There's a lot of reasons for that move, but I still am a wireless network architect for the same private university in upstate New York. That has not changed. Life is evolving for me. And back to today's topic, the the mistakes that we all have to make on occasion. Dun dun dun. Digging in. Alternative title. Yeah, lighten up already. People. I've seen people in individual workday situations and in conferences and stuff just get all up in arms about some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And if you dare deviate from what is perfection, somehow that equals doing something wrong, and there is no forgiving, there's no excuses. And I just say it's all kind of silly. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, but we'll get there. Let's see where this goes. Throughout this, I don't mean to make light of best practices, except where I do. Don't be a zealot, right? That's kind of just some guidance ahead of the individual cases or the individual topics we're going to talk about. Yes, we absolutely should be striving to do things right, but boy, after 20 plus years of doing this, there's a lot of ways of not being technically perfect, absolutely dead on, by the book, and at the same time, everything ends up being okay. And as I say at the bottom, it's just freaking Wi-Fi. It's not brain surgery. Um, it's not to say Wi-Fi isn't important, and I don't mean to minimize what we do and the services that we provide and the connectivity that we provide and how important that wireless has become in the grand scheme of networking, because it really, really has. But at the same time, I think sometimes we overestimate our importance in the world as a group. And I don't mean to offend anybody by saying that, just kind of how I feel today. So, again, just try to set the tone. I am a CWNE, which means I know basically everything. And, that's said tongue in cheek. And I'm saying we don't have to do it right. And poppycock, I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that, perfection, as the old cliche goes, can be the enemy of good, or very good, or great. You can be all of that and still not be perfect. And anybody using your systems doesn't know the difference. Heck, a lot of times you can be downright, um, really, really poorly implemented, and your clients may have no sense that that's what's going on. Um, that's just what Wi-Fi is. It's very flexible. It's very forgiving, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. And the reality is sometimes you can't live exactly by the theory of operation, theory of do this, theory of do that. Break out the CWNA manual and exactly what every vendor tells you should do. And there's this implied notion that if you deviate, somehow the system is going to be less than, and it's again just not reality. So let's talk about some of the rules that I had in mind when I offered up this topic, the things that we have to deviate from. This one has kind of gotten me from day one. Again, I've been doing this for a couple of decades plus now, and this has always come up as kind of an edict. And it makes perfect sense if you can do it. If you can truly know what your client devices are going to be, where can you do that? Maybe in warehouses and hospitals to a certain extent, where there's very purpose specific devices. But more and more, where you have a BYOD environment or where you have BYOD mixed with the ones that you can know about, it's just impossible to say, yes, on this particular wireless network, we're going to see these clients in this quantity, and they're all going to do these behaviors. I mean, the world just doesn't work that way. Yet at the same time, this is one of the fundamental design rules. You got to know your client devices. Yeah, okay. I'd like to every time. Sometimes I can. Usually I can't. And even when I can, I think about how long a given wireless network might be in service on a specific hardware set. And in the lifetime of those access points, how many times are new clients going to cycle in and out? Again, in some cases, like I think of warehouse or stadium ticket scanners, things like that. The wireless client devices may outlive the actual access points before they're refreshed, but that's not all that common in the bigger picture. Again, a lot of times where it's BYOD, how many iPhones come and go in the 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 year span of a AP hanging up on the ceiling. So to say, know your clients, yeah, well, again, it would be great, and to be able to predict everything, but again, that's just not the real world. So um, I do my best, and I roll and don't obsess over what I can't um, know about my clients, because today's client may be gone, a year from now, and I got new clients. It's that fluid, and I'm sure that's not stating anything that most of us on the webinar aren't aware of. Another one, this usually comes from the vendors. You really should be on the latest code version, whether that code be for access points or the code be for controllers or whatever. Unfortunately, even when they've got the little blue ribbon or the gold medal or the gold star or whatever next to the code version, unfortunately, even though that symbol is supposed to pacify you and let you know that everything's going to be a-okay, if you don't have a reason to go to the new code version and you're perfectly stable, I would really think twice. And I will reiterate, I've been doing this for a long time, and especially with certain market leading vendors, it is just playing Russian roulette doing code upgrades. It's just, why are we doing this? Well, we need to because of a new AP. Are we putting out that new AP? Well, no. Okay, then do we really need to? Or there's a security vulnerability that wouldn't impact us because of the way that we're architected, and the management interface of the controller, is behind 6 firewalls, and it's a vulnerability with the management interface, blah, blah, blah. Do you need to upgrade? This is where everybody has their own humor and tolerance and philosophy, but at the same time, boy, it can be horribly disruptive to upgrade and then find a new set of bugs and then downgrade and find new bugs and then get an escalation build and find new bugs, and it can be horrific. So that rule of thumb about being on the latest code version, I kind of thumb my nose at it and I challenge it, and I don't buy into it. It would be great if it was that simple. It just isn't. Yeah, now this one, depending on where you are in the wireless ecosystem, probably have different viewpoints on it. So what I'm talking about is you've got a wireless network. I designed a network 15 years ago. The cable plant that supports that network, the cabling topology. If I've done it right, I may be able to put 3 or 4 generations of access points on it. I know some of you are cringing. Oh, hell no. Every time you do that, you should be redesigning. It's just not my world in many cases. The cost of doing pathway can be astronomical, and getting permits and timing for getting in and out on the upgrades and all of that. But again, if I have done a good, solid, dense design, it's absolutely fine to reuse that design and the world doesn't cave. Now, I'm coming at that philosophy from the end user perspective, the customer perspective. I'm not making any money, nor am I spending money when I do that. But the VARs and the vendors and all of that, there's money on the table if they can convince you that, geez, you're upgrading your APs, you got to think about redesign. You got to think about all kinds of new stuff, and you need our services to do it. And I don't mean to offend anybody. Sometimes it's absolutely required, but what I'm saying is you can also reuse and reuse effectively if what went in was solid to begin with and your client densities haven't changed, and a number of variables still line up that make your original design viable for new access points. So, and again, one of those points that at the end of the chat, be curious if anybody just flat out disagrees with me, because I know that some people will. Onward. Yeah, this one comes up on occasion. I was in a hotel and all the APs went down the hallway. That is just bad Wi-Fi. That is just terrible, and it can't work. Well, did it work? Oh yeah, I was connected, but they shouldn't have done that. Okay, well, get some hobbies. What are you complaining about? In my world, higher ed, I can point to a few different cases where, thankfully it's a bunch of years ago and we've swayed the powers that be to look at the world differently. We were absolutely forbidden from being in student rooms, period. You're not going to put any APs in those rooms. Well, here's the technical merits for why you should let us. Well, sorry, you're not going to. Figure out another way. We have a hotel that we use on occasion for overflow. And again, the same rules were there. You're not going to get into anybody's rooms, but you can work down the hallway. It's like, well, it's not ideal, but we can make it work. And if you know what you're doing and you get over the notion that, by doing this, somehow I'm doing something wrong and terrible, you just embrace it. It's not ideal, but there are ways to make it work. And, I have huge dorms, 500 plus people, where it has worked for 15 plus years, and we will eventually redesign and be in rooms. But it just, sometimes you have to, and it's okay, is the overarching point. The bottom bullet there, don't obsess about, what could have been. Do what you have to do. Make your case for why you'd rather do it different and how it benefits everybody to do it different. But if you lose the argument and the politics or whatever, you move on. You make it happen and you move on. The notion that you can't hang APs on the wall, there's my overall reaction in the first bullet. There was a time, and it wasn't very long ago, back in 802.11n, one of the leading vendors, when they put out their flagship AP, and every AP that came to the market before that, you were provided on the data sheet with the antenna pattern for what it looks like if you put that AP on the ceiling and what it looks like if you put it on the wall. And then somewhere the industry kind of collectively said, oh no, all APs got to be on the ceiling. Never put an AP on the wall. Well, you could put an AP on the floor and it's still going to function. You could put an AP and, behind a, not that you ever should, but you can put it behind a TV on the floor and it's still going to function. it's going to be degraded, and it's going to change the way it works and all of that, because obviously you're blocking it and you're doing different things that aren't ideal. But it's not like the AP turns itself off. It's not like it senses its orientation and says, I shall not transmit until this, you know, idiot fixes me and puts me on the ceiling. It's just foolish. And we have so much distortion of the, you know, the dipole antenna pattern when you get into a lot of these busy environments that we find ourselves in. That initial pattern becomes irrelevant anyways. It becomes, you know, so distorted into this weird fractal that, you know, you could be 2 rooms over and you would have no idea whether the AP 2 rooms over is on the ceiling or on the wall. I mean, it's just, yes, they should all be on the ceiling. It's one of those elements of consistency that will make for a more predictable overall performing wireless network, and it's easier to design and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, being on the wall is perfectly fine. Again, if you want to fight about it afterwards, hopefully we have some time. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on that. I'm going to call it a fuzzy rule. This one is more of a, not so much in textbooks. A lot of us pride ourselves on being able to integrate anything. They want to put something on the network, and by golly, I'm going to jump through 300 hoops to make it happen, and everybody's going to love me because I made this problematic device work on wireless, and look at how good I am at doing oddball things. My answer to that is sometimes you can, you know, but you don't always have to. Just because something comes with a Wi-Fi adapter built in, it doesn't make it a good client. The client device space right now for capabilities and needs, what each client device needs, it's just far-ranging, all over the place, and in some cases ridiculous. You know, the bottom bullet there about keep the Wi-Fi working well. And when I, you know, that should be, to me, it's the overarching, you know, credo, motto, whatever you want to call it, to day-to-day successful wireless. So somebody comes in with some building control thing. Oh, you got wireless. My product will work on any wireless network. Well, yeah, but it's doing BACnet, which, if you're familiar, is just nothing you ever want on wireless generally. Or, you know, somebody wants some utility device that typically isn't on wireless. Well, we figured out how to put it on wireless, but it doesn't do your brand of security, and it needs an old 11B data rate. Yes, you can stretch things to make it work, but should you? And to me, you know, early on in my career, I developed the, I don't want to say spine, but, or whatever. I don't want to make myself appear grandiose, but I developed the ability to look at a potentially problematic client, do some evaluation, and identify if it's a bad fit and say it's a bad fit. And this is where it would be better suited on the network. And this is why it's a bad fit, and state my case. And sometimes, you know, argue it, you know, to the last word, because I truly believe that putting it on the wireless network would be counterproductive. A lot of times in that exercise, I've been able to work with vendors and tell them, you know, this is what's lacking in your product. Change these 2 little things, and you're welcome to come on the wireless network. Then you are a much better fit, not just in my environment, but across the board. You're going to be an easier fit to everybody. Sometimes they want to hear it and evolve. Sometimes they don't. But the bottom line is you are not obligated, or generally shouldn't be obligated, to put every bizarre thing under the sun on wireless if it's not truly a good operational fit. Again, I've seen people who just don't agree. Well, they need it on wireless. We're going to put it on wireless. End of story. And that's their philosophy. I'm saying no. Yeah, another one of those. Oh, I'm sorry. Another one of those potentially controversial, um, edicts. And a lot of this comes down to what kind of wireless that you do and who you do it for, and whether you're a user of wireless as you roam around in the world, or whether you're a provider of wireless is going to shape your frame of reference on the topic. But the notion of never use captive portals, a lot of mobile devices, they just can't deal with them. And, well, if your situation requires a captive portal, if your security policy, your operational policy, whatever, requires a captive portal to meet some, agreed upon need by senior management, use a captive portal. But then again, like I say, make sure it actually works. Know when the certificates are going to expire. Have a plan to keep the captive portal appliance up to date. And, if you are but also be mindful of the, end environment. If you're trying to put out public guest Wi-Fi, when I say public, truly public, you don't care who's on it. It's out there for everybody to take. Yeah, I would say captive portal is wrong. If you're harvesting stuff for marketing purposes, to me, that's not good use. But if I've got a private, or that's not worth the hassle of the captive portal for anybody. If I've got a private network, private company, private whatever, and our policy is we do not give out untrackable access for anybody, and that is our policy. Nobody owes the world and everybody who comes through your doors free wireless. It's okay to use a captive portal. And I know some of my dearest friends out there in the industry absolutely disagree. And, they equate wireless to, you wouldn't charge people for water. You wouldn't throw up a hurdle to let them use the bathroom. I don't buy into those analogies at all. Certainly not for every situation. And if you put up a captive portal and break that, kind of that becoming more popular edict, fuzzy rule, whatever, that you shouldn't use them, but you choose to go ahead and do so, guess what? Everybody is just going to adjust, and you've just met your own security obligations, and the world is going to be okay. And then homing in on the end of my my rants here, and how are we doing on time? I'm sorry, I don't have a clock in front of me.
Just fine. Plenty of time.
Are we okay for time, Jim or
Yep.
Heather?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. When it comes time to design and verify, right? There's a lot of really nice tools out there, and thankfully it's a growing market for both survey and design, predictive design, where you're not actually out surveying. But I see people lose themselves in the tool. I see them becoming a slave to that final report where everything is green. Boy, it's just kind of bewilders me that you can easily lose sight of what it is you're trying to do. You're trying to either design a good wireless network, and that has all kinds of definitions, what good is, because every situation is different. Or you're trying to verify performance of a existing network, or just do a survey, a lay of the land. What do we have here, and how is it acting? But I see so many people convince themselves that unless what I hand over shows everything as being green and perfect, they kind of lose their marbles about the underlying mission of what they're actually trying to do. You start monkeying with offsets, you start changing values, you start questioning the requirements. Well, maybe I shouldn't do -67. I'll just slide it down to -70. Hey, look, it's green now. I made it green. What are you doing? Are you trying to create, the big green blob and tell everybody, look, it's great? Or are you trying to actually do something technically meaningful? And a lot of times you can be technically meaningful. Your environment is a-okay if there's little bands of yellow showing, and even a little bit of red, as long as the red is where it doesn't really matter if it's red or not. But just don't lose sight of exactly what you're trying to do with the tool. And the other part of that is, the other part of this particular rule, if you will, is, boy, you hand somebody a site survey report, it's got a shelf life, and that shelf life is about the time it takes for you to hand them the report or email it to them, because Wi-Fi is so changing. The survey that you just got done doing is going to be slightly different 15 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now. It might be vastly different a year from now. And there's all kinds of criteria that go into, how much did it change, as the environment changes. But the notion of, oh, here's what the survey said last year, so we should be, we'll use that as our baseline. And if anything, isn't, what is should be compared to that, then you can just go down rabbit holes of not using the tool and the results of the tool the right way. So before we get into discussion, I challenge everybody to remember, Wi-Fi was designed to be resilient. You can break rules, you can deviate from best practices, and it will still do its best to make up for what you had to not do perfect. It is very forgiving of situational imperfections. I mean, I've seen clients connect to APs for years, external antenna APs. And guess what? There's no antenna on one of the stubs. I mean, it's not good. You realize that somebody stole one of the antennas a week after you put it in. Go back and check the video. I mean, it's just silly stuff, but Wi-Fi is very, very forgiving. It's flexible. All the data rate, self-adjusting. It'll rate up and rate down, and most of the time, if everything else is good, your users aren't going to care. They're not going to know. The whole notion of most of what we put out there is dual band, and now we're entering the world of tri-band, and Wi-Fi knows that, hey, 5 gig sucks right now. If everything is done right, client will jump over to 2.4 and life will go on, or vice versa. It's just, thankfully, it is so flexible, and it is so dynamic. That's part of what makes it so good to use, and that's what makes it such a viable solution. We strive for perfection as if it were Ethernet, and any variance is going to break the connection, and it's just not that way. The client device space, as I mentioned earlier, is just a royal freaking mess, and that requires that flexibility and the dynamic, nature of Wi-Fi. Otherwise, we'd be in a lot of trouble, given how all over the place clients are. So the whole thing is very complicated, right? We all know that just by the thickness of the CWNA book, the Bible to the career field, if you will. It's getting thicker every time they put one out. And that kind of reflects the underlying complexity of wireless in general. But you can exasperate the complexity by becoming a slave to the, I can only do it this way, I can only do it that way. This guy at a conference who everybody respects said that you always have to put APs on the wall. If I don't put the AP, or I'm sorry, on the ceiling, if I have to hang one on the wall, I have done something terrible. Again, it just, you can take something that's already complicated and you can overcomplicate it by just kind of throwing common sense out with the bathwater. So don't do that. And with that, love to talk to some people. If anybody,
All right.
Love to get your impressions too, Jim. Just, anything
Sure.
in there you disagree with.
Well, thanks, Lee. Great talk as always. And I do want to invite everybody in the audience to drop a question in the Q&A. One of the things I would add to that is how we get super hyper accurate or perceived accuracy in our designs, right down to 1 dB of accuracy. And the truth is, the way we're doing designs and site surveys is based around measuring the RSSI of beacons, which are not transmitted the same way as data frames. And we measure them with very high quality, but also very sensitive survey instruments that aren't the same as the clients that show up. The clients are going to be extremely diverse. Some are going to be really insensitive. Some might be very sensitive. And so we really have to have a lot more margin and headroom in our designs to allow for, all clients to do okay. And that's where it goes, it comes into using, mounting an AP on the wall. Maybe that's okay. Or certainly being able to reuse a design. If you used a design that had some headroom and was real and served all the clients in the area very well, then good chance when that new omnidirectional AP comes out, you can use the same design if the densities aren't too different. If you tried to design down to that 1 dB threshold where we're squeezing everything we can out of an AP's coverage cell, then you're going to have some problems there. So good comment from Bruce in the chat when we were talking about mounting APs on the wall. He says, understanding antenna propagation is key. And I think that's exactly it. The propagation is what's important. And if it meets the requirements of the site.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I go back to being an old guy. I go back to, when the vendors actually showed you, well, this is what it looks like if you put it on the wall. This is what it looks like if you put it on the ceiling. It wasn't a lot of difference. A dipole, depending on how compressed it is, you deviate from that perfect isotropic radiator model of the perfect ball of RF. Depending on how that thing was built, you would see patterns that were like, gee, that's really not too much different if I put it on the ceiling or if I put it on the wall. Usually if it's in the ceiling, it's in the middle of the room. If it's on a wall, obviously it's on the side of the room. But again, if, back to the point about the antenna propagation, if you can think about what's happening as you have to make the change from ceiling to wall or vice versa, the wall is absolutely viable. And to say it should never be used is just silly. I mean, if using a wall saves me thousands of dollars versus putting an AP overhead and I can get the same general coverage just out of a slightly different shape, I'd be foolish not to do it.
Yep, for sure. Good comment here from Anders when you were talking about always staying on the latest code release. He talks about the flip side is finally after a few maintenance releases, the software gets stable and then shortly thereafter goes EOL and we're forced to move to a new major release. And definitely feel that pain, Anders. I've been there. I've run software in production that was end of support, and I've been stubborn and kept it that way for some time before I felt comfortable with software that was a bit newer. But
yeah, I mean,
like
for
you
what
said,
it's
Lee,
worth,
it's spinning the roulette wheel.
yeah, for what it's worth for me, I have been running the same version on a particular model of controller after just so many years of instability. We finally found something that worked. End of life to me, well, end of support, whatever, it doesn't cease to function, or at least on the old code where the vendors aren't so draconian in the control over your environment, where now we also rent what we buy. Back in the early controller, the older controller model, I found stable code and I ran with it for 4.5 years. Code after code after code, new version came out. There was just no reason to change. And the notion of end of support, I didn't need any support because it was finally stable. There was nothing I needed from the vendor at that
That's
point.
exactly right.
So what the hell do I care about end of support? And a lot of times there is support beyond the vendor, especially beyond the TAC. You've got the community forums. If you have access to certain, customer group discussions, you can get a lot better and more accurate information than you might get by going through the vendor's TAC. And a lot of times, at least in the community forums, you'll find vendor TAC people in there speaking a lot more freely than they can when they answer your support ticket. So to me, the notion of end of support, end of life, whatever, it's worthy of noting. You don't want to be cavalier about it, but it's also, to me, not the only reason to upgrade. Oh, end of life, end of support. I better change now. I even challenge that myself.
Yeah, fair point. So, question from Gabriel in the chat. Interesting one. He says, speaking of higher ed or hotel or the hotel maximum of no APs in the rooms, that seems to be tapering off. What, in your experience, do you see as the next hot button political struggle over wireless design? Anything brewing on the horizon there, Lee?
Yeah, I do agree that, can only speak for my own frame of reference. Thankfully, we've finally found ways to get the message across that we need to be in rooms. But where it still gets interesting, and this isn't so much political as it is, IT person, IT person talking to higher ranking IT person, and all of that with design philosophies. And do we run 2 cables to every AP? Which no, to me is just no, don't. Unless you're just dripping money. We have to be overhead. We don't want to do the wall plate AP because the wall plate AP might be buried behind furniture, and those kinds of things. The more product options there are, a lot of that has to be hashed out. I would love to make a lot more use of wall plate APs and reuse cable that we have in a lot of our dorms, but sometimes people don't want to do that for various reasons, and that's its own discussion. But I mean, those kinds of call it technical political discussions are probably a lot more prevalent. The actual space planners, I don't think, give a rip, and the less you have to do to put in new cabling when you do your redesign. If you can do everything on wall plate APs, provided there's existing old Ethernet, Cat 6 in the wall or whatever. Those kinds of discussions in my world are getting interesting. If you go back to the actual essence of the question, political stuff, maybe private 5G versus Wi-Fi. I can see that becoming potentially a discussion in a lot of places. Oh, we don't have budget for both, and you got both vendors saying that we're great, the other one sucks. I can see maybe having to make some of those decisions at some point. Looking down the timeline, depending on how private 5G takes root. But I don't have a good answer, but those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah, and maybe another one. It's not really future. I think it's kind of current. You kind of already touched on it, Lee. Is just, should everything be all wireless? Should we do an all wireless office and just have no cabling anywhere and just have everything on the Wi-Fi as the default? From a management sort of political perspective, it's seen as being the future and more advanced and better technology. And it's not
I
always
would
the
say,
case. That's
yeah,
the
I
that's
would
true.
say you can do that as long as absolutely you can do that as long as you make good client device choices. It doesn't, probably most of the audience knows that all devices are not created the same. And if somebody says to me, we're going all wireless, make it happen, my answer would be, we can do that. But there are going to be some clients that just because we have wireless doesn't mean they're going to function well. And we might have to find an alternative client for the environment. So, very few 802.1x printers out there. And if we don't want to do a PSK network, we may not be able to do a printer because it can't, because there are no 802.1x capable printers. You know what I mean? So everything is good, and we don't want to do the Wi-Fi direct thing or whatever. Everything is going to be situationally dependent. But yeah, you could do all Wi-Fi. Most of our houses are all Wi-Fi, as one example. But at the same time, most of our houses are a lot easier to do that because we don't have the enterprise constraints that come along with doing that very thing.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Lee. I think that's probably all the time we have for Q&A. And Heather, I think we can transition.
Thanks, Jim.
Sweet deal. All right. There he is. Man of the 7 minutes. All right. Thanks so much, Lee. Thanks, Jim, for everything. Great presentation. And now it's Eric's time to shine. We've got 7 minutes with 7 signals. So whenever you're ready, take it away. Ah, if only I could hear you. You look so passionate when you speak.
Still working on it.
Yeah. Oh, I see your screen. So that's good. Ooh, lunch break. Yum.
Eric's buying everybody lunch.
Yeah. He could just type everything into the chat as he shares.
Right.
I need a Jimmy John's number 9, Eric.
Is
Is that the
Italian or the Billy Club?
That's the Italian.
Oh yeah.
Number 11?
Delicious. One of my go-tos. Still don't have you, Eric.
This, that, and the other thing. Wow.
Oh,
wow. Oh, there he is. We got him.
Select a microphone, select a speaker, same as the speaker. Wow, this is rough. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That was crazy. Unbelievable. Wow. This is, I'm not going to blame the Wi-Fi. Like, that's just, every time you switch from Zoom to Teams to this to that, you got to switch all of your inputs. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is crazy. It's like, oh, it's using this speaker, it's using that microphone. All right, let's put all that aside. Thank you for being with us today. I'm very excited to share 7 minutes with 7 Signal, where we take a little piece of 7 Signal, we unpack it for you and try to find some great value based upon what we talked about today. What Lee was talking about today, that was totally awesome, is the fact that Wi-Fi it's not a perfect medium. Oh my gosh. I mean, we all have to share it. And so there's going to be problems. But you know what's incredible? And Jim, I know you and I have joked about this, is the protocol is so robust that it's like, sometimes it seems like it's a miracle it even works. Everywhere we go, we see crummy, crazy environments. And you know what? Sometimes it is a problem, but other times there isn't a problem because the protocol is able to overcome what's going on in the environment. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. Over here on the right, this is the 7 Signal office, right? And so there's, as indicated by the status indicator in the yellow, there is interference. There's ACI, there's CCI, it's all over the place.
Hey, Eric, I think we have your extended desktop and not your browser right now.
Still seeing lunch break, which makes me hungry,
I
but
know.
I'm hungry for some stuff.
Still got Jimmy John's on my mind now.
Sorry.
Wow, crazy. We're just all discombobulated. Hold on, let's try again. Let's try again. Screen number 2. Share.
Rock and roll.
Oh my gosh, wow. We'll get there. All right, so guys, here we go. Over on the right side of your screen or over here, you can see that there is interference in the environment here at 7 Signal. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to knock on people's doors and we're going to say, hey, knock it off, cut it out, you're interfering. Of course not. We're going to do the best we can, okay, using whatever techniques are available to us in order to try to just do the best that's possible in the environment. Now, I would say this one thing, okay? Let's take this and correlate it to root cause. And let's correlate it to the Wi-Fi experience. As we scroll down here, we can actually see that this isn't really affecting the experience whatsoever. I've got good voice quality, I've got good ping, I've got good throughput, I've got good web page download. And so therefore, if there is not really a customer experience that's being impacted, then what's the big deal? We live with it. We allow the protocol to just work through it the best it can. Look at my MCS score over here on the right side of your screen. Okay, 8.5. Okay, that's the 7 MCS, somewhere between 8 and 9, depending upon the data rate. Okay, one more thing that I want to show you. So here's in looking at our Sapphire system, a lot of feedback. You can see in this environment, okay, that there are retries. Of course there are retries. There are retries in every environment, guys. It's not the end of the world. Like Lee was saying earlier, we're not going to be able to make it all green all the time. So don't pull your hair out trying to figure out, okay, how can I remove every little piece of interference in order to get rid of every single retry that I have in my environment. Okay, so what I do is I see that I have retries, but then I look in the middle of the screen and I'm able to identify that in this area, throughput, packet loss, latency, and jitter are all meeting my service level. Therefore, it is not such an emergency. As a matter of fact, if I were to click on this box right here, I would see that my average throughput for the day is 118 megabits per second, and my minimum was 25 megabits per second. So again, environments aren't perfect in Wi-Fi. Nevertheless, we use systems, we use tools in order to identify, okay, are there problems? But more importantly, are those problems having an impact on the Wi-Fi experience? And if not, then go with it. Sometimes you just gotta go. All right, guys, well, that's what I have for you today. I want to thank you for being here. And remember, you and me, we can't see or hear Wi-Fi. Sometimes you can't see or hear me or my screen, but 7 Signal can. Thanks for joining us.